So I guess I'll just start by saying I want to thank everybody for coming. So as you all know, the select board had funded kind of an update to our VFA software. This is a product the town has used. I don't know, Pete or actually Paul Brown, you've worked with the town for a long time. So I think we've probably used this, 15 or so years.
20 years.
20 years, there you go. So it's a software that the town uses to track our building condition. And so what we did over the past, I guess, probably close to 12 months is to have Gordian come out and basically do a complete new inventory of all of our buildings, as it says here, for this facility condition assessment. And so we're here to kind of have a presentation of those findings. There's going to be a lot of data. Staff has seen this a couple weeks ago, so there's a lot of data involved. And this will be a tool that our DPW and staff use going forward to help us prioritize our capital planning process. And then I think at the end, we'll just take a minute to talk about we'll have built into our operating budget going forward. It's included for FY25. Some professional services time with Gordian to help us maintain this. So as new buildings come online or as improvements are done to buildings, we'll be in a constant updating process to ensure that we maintain the integrity of the data in this database. And then one of the things we've talked about just kind of generally is the other services that Gordian provides. And I think maybe Paul Brown will give us a very brief synopsis at the end of if we were to engage them in a discussion about helping us to develop a capital plan using this data and what those services that they provide. So I think that's all I had to say to kick it off. I don't know, Michelle, if you want to add anything.
Thanks, Beth. All I was going to say, and thank you for that update for me. And thanks I see that we've got some FinCom folks, capital planning, school committee here, some select board members. We've seen a lot of output in VFA. We've heard a lot about the software, and the select board did invest in upgrades to the software. And you heard Beth's commitment to making sure the data stays current and relevant. I'm certainly looking forward to understanding, I'm given examples of these massive thick printouts. VFA can throw off 82 pages of findings. That's great, but how do you distill that into something actionable? So I'm looking forward to today's presentation. Hopefully that's useful for our school committee and schools folks with their facilities. Pete, I know, could give a master class on facilities management, but just thanks everybody for making the time this morning, and thank you to Gordian for stepping us through this, and I'll turn it over to you. Thanks, Beth, and thanks everybody.
Great, well, thank you so much, Beth and Michelle, and everyone for joining this morning, and I'd like to thank Pete in particular for supporting this effort as we engaged in the field. Happy to have everybody here. Very happy to be here. Great open. There's going to be 3 parts to this presentation. We'll talk about our methodologies and then look at the data. And then the last part, which you have both touched on, the last part, we're going to have Paul Brown speak to some capital budget prioritization workshop options that will help the town decide what to do with the funds available. So we will give him his moment to step into the spotlight at the end, and I'm sure that you'll be pleased with what the capabilities are in the software with that additionally built on layer. So I'm happy to get into that. So I'm going to turn off my camera so I can look off to the side and manage the screens over here, and let's go ahead and jump into the presentation. Okay, so again, thank you for being here. We did the thanks to everyone for attending. I just wanted to give a little introduction about myself. I am Ryan Peters, the account manager for Gordian. I've been an HVAC engineer by trade with about 11 years or so in the design world. I have about 15 years or so now in the facilities condition assessment world. Had a short stint in the mechanical equipment sales world, so I'm happy to bring my experience to this world and support the town of Winchester's capital planning needs. Okay, so again, as I mentioned, the 2 primary parts to my presentation of findings for the FCA portion here In part one, we're going to talk about our approach, touch on some of the standards and reference sources, how we arrive at our cost estimates, and we'll review some key definitions of terms that you'll hear throughout the presentation. In part two, we'll get into the data, and we'll focus on 3 essential questions that the FCA aims to help Winchester answer. Presentation will be about an hour long, so in the interest of time, if you would kindly hold your questions until the end, we'll see that I think many of the questions that you have will be answered throughout as we work our way through the 35 slides or so in this deck. And again, there's going to be an additional presentation by Paul at the end that will, I think, further answer some questions. So I'm actually very excited for that portion. So there's really 3 parts to today's presentation, but 2 parts to mine. Okay, so some of the key terms that we will talk about today, just some quickly, and we'll get into some of these a little bit further. We'll discuss these definitions in more detail in upcoming slides. But CRV, that's current replacement value. FCI, that's the facility condition index. RI, requirement index. Asset systems and requirements, those are all parts of the data and how we organize it, how we name them. Asset is essentially a building in most cases, but in some cases an asset can be something like a ball field, like Sharsha Field, which was assessed as part of this effort. Systems are components of the assets. So a system is a piece of the building. It might be a boiler, it might be acoustic ceiling tile, windows, doors, etc. All the things that an asset is made up of and where its value comes from, we break that down as systems in our data, and then we can individually track those systems and say when requirements are needed for those systems. What a requirement is a cost item needed for those systems. So requirements are basically your upcoming cost needs, and we organize those by category, priority, and system groups. And again, you'll see more about that as we get into some of the details in part 2 in particular. So let's go ahead and jump into part 1 here. So the way that we go about our work is we send architects, mechanical and electrical engineering professionals out to the field. They review available documentation and speak with knowledgeable staff, whether that's Pete or people that know the building and live and work in the buildings. We walk the assets to identify and visually inspect the building systems. It's a non-destructive assessment. There's no operational testing. It is purely visual. So a lot of the information that we have is based on what was observable or what information we received in our conversations on site. We, of course, photo document and assess conditions of all those systems. And then we identify the estimated age and its expected useful lifetime and the remaining useful life. Typically, that useful life ranges from 0 to 100 years. 100 years seems like an awful long time, but that's for things typically like structure, which we don't expect to need to be fully renewed anytime very soon. So the range is wide there, but it's appropriately broken out by system type as we break it down. One thing that I do want to put an emphasis on here is that our estimates are based on like-kind systems and their replacement value. So that's very important. So I want to emphasize this just for a moment. If, for example, you have an older technology that is single zone ductwork, let's say, and it's just one temperature flowing through unintelligent duct, it's nothing but sheet metal. But today's world, if you built that building, you might have a variable air volume system with VAV boxes and reheats. We're going to price it based on what we see in the building as it is. Our intent is to try to show you what you have and what it's going to cost to maintain that over the building's lifetime, not what should it be if you were to engage an architect or engineering firm to give you the modern version of HVAC or whatever system it is that you're talking about. So very important that everything is based on like-kind system replacement values. Okay, and as we walk through the buildings, of course, we identify repairs and renewal needs for each asset. That's part and parcel to what we do. And then we provided your team the opportunity to review our draft data before we go live. Any questions about that at this point? Just in particular on that like kind. Okay, great. We can touch on that at the end if there are further questions. Okay, so when we walk through the building, some of the things that we're looking for in particular are renewals. You'll see that that's the bulk of where the funding needs come from, is system renewal needs. But we also look for repairs that may not be an entire system that needs replacement, maybe just a portion of it, like some rusted components or stained ceiling tiles, damaged windows, etc. So we look for those things as well and try to capture those cost needs. And then we look for some code issues as well when we walk through the buildings.
Can I just inject that those pictures that you had up there were samples from somewhere else? Those aren't actually our facilities.
Yeah, they're just representative samples to show things that are like an aging roof and what that might look like. That's something that we would capture. Yeah, these are standard stock photos. Yeah. Okay, so talking about the standards now, the way that we apply or make sure that our data is consistently applied is we reference industry standards. First of all, for the cost estimates, our software has built into it RS means construction cost data. That's nationally recognized construction cost library. That is a Gordian product, so it's integrated seamlessly into the VFA software. And those costs from RS means for things like what is a double pane steel window, what is a membrane roof, what are those costs per square foot? That's where our costs come from, is this RS means database. And again, that's updated annually, with the last update having taken place on April 6th. Now, because this particular presentation has been in process and we were just trying to get this scheduled, this final meeting scheduled, the values that you'll see in this presentation of findings are the 2023 values still, but we will have one report that we will submit, which will be a record copy with actual printed out reports from the facility software. That package will be called the final report, and that will capture the 2024 update. So I just wanted to call that to your attention. One of the other things that we utilize is the Building Owners and Managers Association, BOMA. We reference BOMA standards for their long established equipment lifetimes and system lifetimes, and that as well is built into our systems. If we find that there's a more detailed piece of equipment that BOMA may not speak to, but another industry reference such as ASHRAE may speak to, we will utilize that source as well. So our lifetimes are based on well-established standards in the industry. And all of our data is organized by ASTM uniformat, and we take that down to level 4. So we don't just group things by structure or superstructure versus below grade structures. We take that down to the next level. Level 3 here would be breaking superstructure down into floor construction, roof construction, and then even further where we are at the level 4 of the breakdown, we break it down into things like basement floor construction, upper floor construction, ramps, balcony floors, stairs, etc. So the data is very organized, and it allows for searching through the data for particular system types that you may be concerned about, like roofs, windows, or interior finishes, for example. So as I mentioned, cost estimates are developed using RS means, which is integrated into facility. Now, that is a national baseline, but those costs are then regionally adjusted. So some, for example, take a 20 horsepower pump, that's going to cost very different in Manhattan, Kansas than it would in Manhattan, New York, for example. And that is built into the software. So your costs that you'll see in your software are adjusted for your local area. And when they come in at that adjustment, they are reflected at the installing contractor rates. So that would be for that 20 horsepower pump. That's going to be the plumbing contractor or the mechanical contractor's cost. That's where we start, but that then gets adjusted as well. So how is that adjusted and why? Well, we have in our software something that we call adjustment factor. And in your data, that's an adjustment factor of 2.0. That essentially doubles the cost of the installing contractor's cost. Why do we do that? That's to account for things like GC overhead and profit, capital projects charges, engineering and design fees. You may have additional staging costs that you would incur. There's no way that a construction cost reference library like RS Means would be able to appropriately account for that at the line item level by saying, here's a 20 horsepower pump. And by the way, we expect that our customers are going to have twice the experienced cost from what it costs a contractor to put that in. So we work with our customers to develop this adjustment factor to account for those soft costs and try to simulate it, which brings the cost in our software closer to what you might experience in your actual projects. So that's trying to simulate those soft costs as well as the known costs. Okay, and so this is one of the definitions here that I want to talk about. This is an important one. Current replacement value, CRV. So that's, in a nutshell, that is the sum of the system replacement values. So if you took this is just a sample building and it's not broken down into the great level of detail that our software goes into, this is just very high level information. But if all of the sum of the structural systems in a given asset totaled up to $2 million, which again, that might consist of your steel framing, your concrete, your foundations, etc. If all of those in the structural group totaled up to $2 million, that's just one component of the asset CRV. All of the exterior enclosure, which would be your brick cladding, your exterior doors and windows, all of those add up to $3 million, and so on, going down the line. All of these different groups add up to a total value. That's the value of the building. That's what we reference as the CRV, the current replacement value. So you'll see CRV in some of the upcoming slides, but that's basically the building value, or in Shasha Field's case, the value of the ball field. So now we get into how do we determine the condition of a given asset? Well, that's we have a scoring methodology, which is the Facility Condition Index. And that's a very simple fraction. There's a lot on this slide, but I'll just take you right over here. That fraction is the sum of the costs that are needs, deficiencies, divided by the asset CRV, which we just talked about. So it's the dollars needed to repair items and replace items divided by the total value of the building. So what that means in essence is the lower the FCI score, the better the condition, because that means you have a smaller numerator. So that is a calculation based on IFMA definitions. So that's standard throughout the industry. And one thing that I want to note as well is that the FCI costs, which is one of the terms you'll hear me reference in some of the tables in this presentation, the FCI costs are they are based on the requirements due within the FCI window. And for this project, the FCI window is 5 years. Okay, so FCI is the sum of all of those costs within the 5-year FCI window divided by the building value, that CRV. And again, that's expressed as a decimal. But what does that decimal really mean? It's kind of hard to talk about a decimal if you're having conversations about a building. So what we do is we take that decimal score, as you can see in this little table here, and we assign a range of FCI scores to a more easily discussed term like excellent. That would be anywhere, an FCI score of anywhere from 0 to 0.1. And that basically what that means is 10% of the building's value is needed to keep it up within the next 5 years. That's the cost that it would experience within the next 5-year window. So that's an excellent building. And then the next range would be the the good score from 0.11 to 0.2. We have a bigger range that we consider fair, 0.21 to 0.4, and then poor range, 0.41 to 0.6. So that's about when you're getting into the range of a building having half of its value needed to be spent on it within the next 5 years. That gets pretty costly. So when you get above that range, we're looking at the 0.61 range and higher. That's a pretty high score. We consider that to be deficient. And at that point, you might consider, are you really better off investing in repairing this building? Do you want to divest of it? Is it a demo candidate? So these scores, when we get the FCI score, converting them into these simple words, it just makes it a little bit more easy to talk about it with people who may not have the knowledge about the software itself and these IFMA definitions. Okay, so one other term very similar to FCI is RI. That's the requirement index. Very, very similar, except that's using, RI uses a 10-year period, and it includes all the requirements in the 10-year window. So the difference there in what's included is going to be things like, for example, if there was one pump in the building when it was designed for the heating system, if that's the way it was designed, we're not going to penalize the building and say that the FCI score is reduced because it's lacking a redundant pump. But our assessors might call out, hey, we think you should really have a redundant pump in the building. We're going to capture that requirement, but it would only be reflected in the RI score because that one includes things that are the quote unquote nice to haves, whereas FCI includes the need to haves. So this is really the FCI score in that shorter term 5-year window. That's where you're really going to get the sense of what does this building truly need. And the RI score, that longer term lookout over the 10-year period, that's where you're going to get that, hey, what should we really do in addition to just what do we need? Okay, but we're going to focus mostly on the FCI because that really dictates spending. Okay, so going on to the next slide here, we're now jumping into part 2 of the presentation where we'll take a look at some of the goals of the assessment and we'll get into some of the numbers. So these are the essential questions that we want to ask in the facility condition assessment. First, we want to know, what do we own? What's the value of what we own? And then once you understand that, you want to understand what are the needs of those assets? Why are they deficient? Where are they deficient? And then third, you need to understand how much will it cost to repair and address those needs, to renew those systems that are aging out. And then finally, we'll take a look at some things to consider when you're trying to determine, once we know all those bits of information, what are we going to do with it? How do we go forward from there? And I think you'll see this is actually a snapshot that you may see something similar in Paul's presentation at the end, which that'll be, again, I'm very excited for you folks to see that. That's really going to help the town understand how to make use of this data. Okay, so first question, let's start by looking at defining what the town of Winchester owns. So what informs Gordian's data? Well, over 3,200 data points were generated during this FCI effort, all of which help tell the story of those assets. It's important to note that all these data points live within our facility software. This is a live data platform that can be maintained and updated over time, added to and expanded to. It's not just a static report that will sit on a shelf and become increasingly obsolete with every day that passes. We will provide that in addition so that you have that snapshot in time, but that's a big differentiator between what we provide and what other solutions exist out there in the industry. We all know that 3-ring binders tend to sit on a shelf and don't get frequently used, whereas this is live and it gets updated annually with the refreshed cost data. So that's an important distinction. Wanted to point that out. So there was 21 assets that we reviewed in total. You can see the breakdown between the systems that were generated and revisited for any existing data that we refreshed. And again, that total over 3,200 data points. So here's a look at some of those key indicators from the assessed portfolio. And they're broken down as 20 buildings with one field, which was Shasha Field, as I had noted. The total replacement value, the aggregate of all those systems created in this portfolio, 627.7 million. With FCI cost total, that's the total cost that we project over that first 5-year window, the FCI window. That comes in at just under 163 million. And the average asset age, not surprising with so many historical buildings, 72.6 years. The range of your FCI for the various assets, it range all the way down from near perfect all the way up to quite deficient. We will take a look at what that is in a moment. But the average score, you're falling toward the good side of the fair range. So that 0.259, right? Again, what is that 0.259? What does that mean? It means your buildings overall, the assets overall, are within that fair range and comfortably so. So this table here shows the assets that were assessed under this contract, stack ranked by FCI score. And you can see this column here, it shows at the top of the list, the DPW barn sign shop. That's the asset with that 0.92, it's actually 0.918. That's that FCI score. That's the worst FCI score in the portfolio. But it's due to its size and its value, the FCI costs, which is now, let's talk about the numbers for a moment. The FCI costs are not nearly as high as some of the others in this range. But this is just a table that examines the condition of the buildings without respect to cost. So that's how this one is sorted. Right below the DPW barn sign shop in the red box, we see these two assets here, Mystic School and Water Treatment Plant, both of which are also in poor condition based on their FCI score. We've got a 0.84 and a 0.75, so that's actually in the deficient range. We'll note that both of those assets actually have much higher FCI costs, so the dollar costs are much higher than that sign shop that sits at the top of this list. And that goes back to the value of the buildings being much higher at 15.3 million and 13.3 million. So FCI is only one indicator. It speaks to condition, and it's a good way to benchmark buildings one versus the other, good, fair, poor, etc. But what about those actual dollar needs and how do those stack up? I think that's something that really moves the needle here. So this next slide takes a look at the FCI costs. So this is the dollars stack ranked over the 5 years. And you can see now the list changes. And this is at the top here, we see McCall Middle School, Town Hall, Muraco Elementary School, and Mystic School, which all have FCI costs greater than $12 million. McCall has the highest dollar needs at almost $44.5 million, more than doubling the next closest asset, Town Hall, which is just under 20 million. So that's quite a gap there. Speaking to the McCall Middle School needs, even though its FCI falls in at 0.38. So it's important to look at both of these, the FCI and the FCI costs. Just want to quickly note too that at the top of this table, McCall Middle School was renovated about 25 years ago. That might feel pretty recent, especially given the asset age across the portfolio, the average asset age. But it's not surprising in a 25-year-old renovation to learn that there are problems with the pneumatic control systems leaking. There's different controls generations for the DDC oversight. So you're going to start to experience soon some issues with non-compatibility maybe some systems that won't be supported. There's also some VRF systems, variable refrigerant flow systems, which, if you're not familiar with that, it's some cooling systems, split cooling systems that are approaching the end of their lifetimes. Most mechanical engineering systems and electrical engineering, plumbing engineering systems, most of those systems fall within a 20 to 30 year lifetime, their expected useful lifetime. So again, with a 25-year-old renovation, it's not surprising to see that dollar value really starting to creep up, given the size of the building at 172,000 plus square feet and the overall value at 115 million. Not surprising to see such high costs there with a 25-year-old reno. So let's take a look at some of the funding needs over that FCI 5-year window and see how those needs can be organized by category, system group, and priority. So we'll start with FCI costs organized by asset and category. So over here you have the assets. Across the top you have the various categories. And as shown in this table, life cycle requirement category, which is shown as beyond useful life, that makes up approximately 97.5% of the $158.4 million worth of total FCI costs. Sorry, that's 162.4. We see that McCall and Town Hall, as well as Muraco and Mystic School, they're sitting atop this list, just like they were in the stacked ranked FCI costs we just reviewed. And you can see that most of their costs as well are coming from this category, again, which is just a sign of the buildings having a lot of systems that are aging out and reaching the end of their useful lifetime. Now, this slide, again, working with the same data, this slide just organizes it differently, arranged by category and by system group. So we have the categories across the top, but now instead of arranging them by building, this is the aggregate of all the buildings costs, just arranged by system group. So when we look at this table, this tells us where those costs are coming from. And we've stack ranked them by the most cost needy system groups at the top. So at the top of the list, we see that the beyond useful life needs are primarily, or the highest portion of them is coming from the electrical system group. Right behind that is interior construction and conveyance, and that's followed by HVAC system needs. So those are all within the $34 to $39 million range each. And you can see that they really are the bulk of the needs. So again, you're looking at a lot of engineering systems that are coming due. Those each contribute 20 to 22.5% of the overall costs at these top three here. And then again, here's a look at those same FCI costs, this time organized by system group and priority. As you can see, those are flagged here at the top. So this slide tells us when those FCI costs for electrical and interior construction and HVAC are due. So again, you see those same numbers here, 34.5 up to just about 40 million. And you can see that most of them fall within priority 3. So priority 1, just so you understand what that is, priority 2, priority 3. The priorities are the way that we basically say when they're needed. So priority 1 is within the first 12 months. Priority 2 would be needs that we see coming due within 12 to 24 months. And priority 3 covers the rest of the FCI window, which would be years 3, 4, and 5. And if you look at the total here, you can see that most of those cost needs do fall within that 3, 4, and 5 years out range. So what that tells us, just as a little bit of added insight, what that tells us is that overall, we do expect that those engineering systems and all the other systems listed here too, those systems do have a bit of life left, but not too much, because they're going to start coming due in bulk very soon. Okay, so now let's take a look at FCI costs for roof needs. So again, these are roof needs within the first 5 years. The priority 1 column, called out in red here, shows $150,000 of FCI costs due in year 1. That's attributable mostly to slate shingle repairs at Town Hall as the most urgent needs in the portfolio. Priority 2 column here has a row called out in yellow here, which shows about $41,000 or so of FCI costs due in year 2, attributable to, again, slate shingle repairs at the DPW sign shop. Now, I just want to, yeah, Pete, I just want to point out that Pete and I had a discussion yesterday. I think this is what you wanted to touch on. There are some additional bits of information about roof projects that are needed, which Pete, I did have an opportunity to engage with PS and Paul specifically about this. We will be able to go ahead and incorporate that new information and capture the additionally provided information about some further roof projects that are needed. They are pretty pricey, but especially with slate shingle, those are stone shingles, so it's difficult unless you see the shingles hanging or loose shingles, or you're informed of the condition and you have that known condition. It can be difficult to ascertain when in the field if there's a failing slate shingle roof system overall. Those systems have an exceptionally long lifetime. So we do have some new information that will update this and bring in some further costs. We didn't have time because this is so fresh to get that in the POF. But go ahead, Pete. I know you to add to there.
So this is going to be kind of a plug for how this is live data. Stuff was generated and reviewed. It's massive amounts of data, but with some of the bigger things that we're dealing with that we've had engineering on and we have a little further development, the plan will be to, not just jump and try and stick something in and move it around now, but when we have our full engineering design and cost estimation number, we'll be able to utilize with the customer care hours or the continued work with VFA. We'll work with them to take the full documents and full discovery and update the data as we go. And that's the plan for keeping up with the data. Even if we don't do the project, or we're able to use those documents to set a further plan, that's what we'll be engaging in to do further development or tighten up the numbers in this. Again, a lot, as Ryan said, these are developed from somewhat the 30,000-foot view, and there isn't any real destructive testing or advanced view of the project. So I just want to throw that caveat in there that there's things like windows at the library and town hall that we'll be putting in actual engineered development numbers and things like that. So I wanted to preface everything with that.
Yeah, thank you, Pete. Yep. So that, again, as Pete said, and as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, with this being live data, that really allows for that to be managed, and any reports can be rerun, buildings can be reevaluated, and priorities can be adjusted over time as needed, as that data is changed. And in fact, after the roofs are repaired and windows are replaced, the data can be updated to reflect that, and you can get a glimpse at what does that do to our building? What condition are we in now? How much does it need now? So there's a big difference between just a static report and live data, which is what our platform provides. Thank you, Pete. Appreciate that insight. Okay, so just quickly, actually, you know what? Let me just go back one slide here. I just want to add a little commentary here with the roof needs. The reason that I like to break out the roof needs like this is it's wonderful to have a great condition building, but if the building itself is in good condition and the roof is in poor condition, you're really jeopardizing everything that is contained within the building. Other systems can degrade sooner. So breaking out the roof is the roof related systems and its needs. It's a great way to get into the data and extract what's most important. Roofs are very important because every building has a roof that needs to protect its contents. You may want to, for example, at Town Hall, it may be very important to maintain the systems that are, I would normally say customer facing, but we'll say townspeople facing. So that would be things like your interior finishes, right? So you may decide that we really want to focus on the interior finishes at Town Hall so that the people feel like this is a well-maintained building. Utilizing the way that we organize the data by system group and uniformat, it is absolutely possible to get in there and extract a report that shows you the condition and the cost needs associated with those particular types of interior finishes systems, if that's what you wanted to do. This slide here shows us roofs and roof needs, but you can search the data for anything in particular that you're looking for. Could be building control systems. Maybe you're engaged with a controls contractor that you'd like to have him evaluate, or that company evaluate all the systems across your asset portfolio. So it's possible. I just want to, again, point that out. This is just one way of looking at it. Okay, so now that we have all of this information, the question becomes, how do we spend and what might the impact of that spending be? So here, we're going to take a look at 3 potential funding scenarios to inform your decision making. The first option is to fund at 2% of CRV. So that means annually spending 2% of the building's value. And that is shown by the green line with dots here that slopes upward to the right. The vertical green bars across the bottom, that shows the spending needs of that particular funding scenario. At about it remains consistent throughout the years because it's based on 2% of the building value. So that you see the spending needs per year remaining consistent. The upward slope here, what that indicates is that if you're spending 2% of the building value, you can see that FCI, which is on the right, FCI is why you have this rise here. So 2% spending is going to result in the building condition worsening, creeping up on the FCI scale, okay? And that's overall for the asset portfolio. The second scenario that we'll take a look at here is funding to maintain the current FCI. That's this blue line with the blue squares. So that correlates again to FCI over here on the right. The dollar values per year is over here on the left, and the years run across the bottom of this chart. So you can see that now the steady state is not spending, it's FCI. So if FCI remains consistent with spending each year, you're going to see that the spending each year varies. And that's because you're spending based on what's coming due each year. Okay, so that's that shows what that scenario would look like. And that has a certain set of dollar needs. So we'll take a look at what those dollar needs to maintain FCI will be on the next slide. I just want you to understand what these scenarios are in this first look at the funding scenarios. The third scenario is sort of a pie in the sky scenario. It's just for comparison's sake. And that is indicated by the sloping red line with triangles that goes down over time. And that is reflecting a goal of improving FCI to 0.1 within 18 years. Why 18 years? It's kind of an arbitrary number, but the point of that is just to show that, yes, we do in fact reach that 0.01 FCI score. And you can see that the FCI is leveling off on this line that tracks FCI. And then the costs associated with that third scenario, that pie in the sky scenario of trying to make a nearly perfect condition set of buildings, that has the highest spending in terms of raw dollars on an annual basis, basically across the timeline. There's a couple where it's even, in this first scenario here, there's one that has higher spending than this scenario. But by and large, when you're trying to get to a nearly perfect building condition, that's going to be your highest annual spending. So why do we even include that? Because you're not trying to really get to a perfect condition building. We understand that. But including that helps define the bookend of what would it take, you know, what's that penultimate amount to spend to get to that perfect building. It just defines that bookend so you understand overall condition. So let's take a look at what that actually looks like. So here we have the total spending per year for each of the three scenarios. These are all color correlated. So green again is this is the summary of results and spending needs for the 2% scenario. In this middle blue box, we have the results and spending needs for the maintain current FCI scenario. And then in red, we have, again, correlating to the red line with red triangles on the previous chart. This is that pie in the sky one, so we can understand what the bookend, you know, ultimate worst cost case spending needs would look like. So let's take a look at the 2% spending. That has spending at an average. Again, average is going to vary per year. Actually, this scenario stays consistent. The other two vary per year. But the spending per year here is about 12.5 million, and over a 20-year period, that's about $250+ million. But unfortunately, that level of spending results in an overall average FCI score of 0.527. So that shows that upward sloping green line here on this prior slide. That's where you end up at the end. That's not the result that we want to see. So that suggests that 2% may not be adequate. And in this second scenario, maintaining current FCI, which was in the fair range over the next 20 years, average spending here was about 21 million with a total 20-year spend of about 420 million. And again, the FCI score doesn't change because that's what we're trying to maintain in this potential funding scenario. And then lastly, the third scenario, you can see that the average spending per year jumps up another about $8 million per year compared to just maintaining. So to improve it in that bookend scenario, not that you have the $28 million available, but that's what it would take to really maintain the buildings and improve those conditions and get them to that really ideal condition of 0.01 FCI. Again, that's really an unattainable goal. We don't recommend that you pursue that, but it just does define that bookend. And the total for the 20-year spend there is $575 million. And then down here, you can see if you've been taking a look at these. This just shows the difference between the green scenario and the blue scenario, the annual spending difference, and the total overall spending difference over 20 years. Again, here you see very similar deltas. Right? This is about $8 million between the maintain to near perfect, about an $8 million difference. And you can see over here, it's about an $8 million difference. And then just to look at the funding at 2% versus the pie in the sky goal, you know, that falls in at about $16 million, but the total is getting pretty significant. So there's something that we can learn from this. If we take a look at this one scenario here to maintain current FCI of 0.259, if you split that down the middle and look at these tables here, right? Anything to the left is going to be lower spending, resulting in an increasing FCI score. That's not what you would ideally like to have, is your building's worsening condition over time. So if you spend less than the 21 million per year, you should expect that the FCI condition is going to worsen. If you spend more than this scenario, more than the 21 million, you might expect that your buildings are going to have an improving condition overall. So this is sort of the fulcrum of the spending and FCI scores It's just kind of a good bellwether. Again, this note here is very important. In all of these funding strategies that we're exploring here and just showing 3 different possibilities, we have set inflation to a rate of 0, and we've set backlog deterioration to a rate of 0. Now, why? Because it's very easy to look out over on this chart, on that prior slide. It's very easy to look out on this chart all the way out to 2044 and have an understanding of what the corresponding dollars actually mean and feel like. Whereas if we try to adjust this for inflation, which is easy to do in the software, but if I was showing you the numbers adjusted for inflation, that's an inflation projection. And honestly, over the last few years, we know inflation has been all over the map. So do we try to account for 2% or 3%, which has been traditionally where the inflation rate has been, or do we account for almost 10%? That would really make these numbers look quite a bit different, and make that chart look quite a bit different. The important thing that I want to stress, though, is that right in the software, it's very easy to explore different scenarios. If you wanted to enter 10% inflation and see what that looks like in year 13, you can do that, and you can do that very quickly. So it's possible to look at everything with whatever variables you want. But again, just wanted to note that all of this is set with 0 inflation and 0% backlog deterioration. Okay, so the question becomes, what do we do first now that we have all this information? Well, there's $18.6 million in priority 1 and priority 2 FCI costs, averaging $9.3 million over the first 2 years. So that's a good place to start, but where do we go from there? So here are some examples of strategies that might be used to the town to determine how to spend the available funding. You might spend on critical systems. You might decide to invest in keeping your best buildings in great shape to prevent them from sort of falling off the needs cliff, right? You might apply available funding to cosmetic appearance needs while seeking additional funding for critical systems. That may be something like the town hall, the public library. You might invest in assets with higher visibility to tax-paying residents and businesses so that they feel that they're getting a return on their investment. Or you might reduce carbon footprint and improve your return on investment by investing in energy efficiency upgrades, lighting, for example, or improvements in windows. And of course, you would want to try to avoid renovating assets that their condition might make them candidates for divestiture, demolition, or complete reno. So those are some things, some examples of spending strategies that the town may consider. So how do we keep things running in the meantime? This may seem self-evident, but what you want to do is you want to spend on what's absolutely necessary, those things that are near failing or have already failed, or problematic, leaking systems, that sort of thing, leaking piping systems. Then there's you want to try to run some of the systems almost to failure. Your older engineering equipment, pumps and air handlers, things like that. You want to try to run some of those to failure, which is really getting the most out of the money that's already been invested at. So that's how to maximize the ROI on those systems that already exist but are aging. Want to wait for some major renovations and try to group things together and get an economy of scale. And another consideration would be planning for service needs and program changes. So if a building is about to change its use, that may be something that you can try to hold off and not spend money on that building now unless something fails. So those are strategies in how you might keep the buildings working and make the dollars stretch a little further. So those are what we call strategy buckets. So you want to plan to fund what's absolutely necessary, build a reserve to cover the things that we expect to fail, which that's a sort of unpredictable amount. You know, we predict or project that There may be some systems failing within the next 2 or 3 years, but not all of them are going to fail on year 2 or year 1 or year 3. So you want to build a reserve to plan for those things when they do fail. And again, save for major renovations of aging buildings to achieve that economy of scale. So what does that look like? Again, just exploring these buckets a little bit. We'll kind of go quickly through this slide here, just keeping an eye on time. And I want to make sure that there's some opportunity for question and answer, as well as Paul's presentation. But what might those strategy buckets look like? What types of percent should we plan for? The things that are must-dos, the things that are, for example, failed equipment, leaking sanitary systems, rusted and perforated doors, things like that. Those are the need to spend. So all of those must-dos, you really want to try to cover all of those in any given year. But the run to fail group, the things where performance is dropping, parts may become difficult to obtain as systems age out and equipment generations change. Maybe that's only 10% of those in the, hey, let's flag these and watch them. Maybe only 10% of those actually manifest as spending needs per year. And then the items that you can group within the strategy bucket of holding for major renovation. Hopefully you're not spending any of those in the first few years, and you can put those off and group them together to get that economy of scale. So maybe that's a 0% spend on any given year. And then you might create your own strategy buckets for things that require additional funding, maybe federal funding, maybe historical grants, federal grants, things that require outside sourcing or additional time to get the funding or to define those needs. Let those needs and those funding sources play out over time, and put those projects off until that funding becomes available or the program needs become more clear. So those are, again, some strategies that you can use to help decide how to make the best use of the available funds, because the reality is the available funds will never equal all of the identified needs. But you're not going to have all those identified needs failing on any given year. So we have to try to plan for it and account for those variables. Okay, so as we getting close to wrapping this up here, I just wanted to review a few of those key terms. FCI, again, that is the Facility Condition Index. That's the 5-year score. It is the total of the 5-year needs divided by the asset's value, that's CRV. RI score is the very similar metric, but it's a 10-year lookout, and it includes the need to haves as well as the nice to haves. The FCI score is really the need to haves. Okay, and then an asset, again, that's usually a building, sometimes other items of value like infrastructure or a ball field like Shasha Field. System or components or equipment within an asset, that's where the value is arrived at. That's how we define that the value of an asset, the CRV, is by the sum total of our systems. And requirements, those are your dollar needs, which can be organized, again, by category, priority, and system groups. What type of need? ADA, renewal, reliability, life safety, that's your category. The priority is when is it needed? When does it fall on the timeline? And your system groups, what type of system, what group of components in the building is the dollar needs associated with. Generally, we try to group those HVAC, electrical, building envelope, site, etc., so that it allows you to look at the data and narrow it down a little bit further. So again, here in review, those next step coming up, as you can see, we're available to help with general questions. We talked about some additional services and some customer care hours with Pete. And Paul's going to talk to some of the strategic capital planning decisions that we can also support you with, like the capital budget prioritization workshop. Beth, that was something that we talked about in an earlier review. And I'm very happy to say that we were able to incorporate that into today's meeting. So I hope you'll be pleased with that. We also offer equipment tagging and inventory services, additional assessments with our assessors out in the field, and we can customize our software if needed as well. So if there's anything that we can do to further assist, we would be more than happy to. So I'd like to thank you all for joining for this portion of the presentation of findings on the FCA work. And Beth, I see you have your camera on. I assume that you have a question or a comment.
No, I was just going to say, I think we'll have some time for questions at the end, but was Paul just going to give a few minute kind of overview of what a capital planning workshop might look like?
Yes,
Awesome.
Yeah, we can get into questions now or hold after. I think it would be advantageous to let Paul speak to that portion, because I think that's going to answer a lot of the questions that that we may have. So Paul, thanks for joining us. I'd love to have you take over the screen share and
sure.
Go ahead and add your
Thank you. That was a great presentation, Ryan. Thank you very much. Let me get this set up here. Give me just a second. And I will share my screen. Okay, hang on. Help me out. Why am I not seeing the share button here?
Down along the bottom, screen share.
Oh yeah, got it. Thank you. Okay, let me know when you can see it.
Yeah, we've got you, Paul.
All righty, thanks. So I'll just want to introduce myself or reintroduce myself a little bit. My name is Paul Brown. I am an architect licensed in Massachusetts, and I've been with VFA/Gordian for 11 years now. Prior to that, I was with in a design firm role here in the Boston area. And one of the things I enjoy about working with the town of Winchester is that in my previous life as a designer, I did do a fair amount of work both on public K-12 schools and also on historic buildings. So Winchester is a great fit for me. So I'm eager and happy to be able to continue that relationship and partner up with you all, basically for anything that you might need as a follow-on to the assessment work. And as Ryan explained, our facility condition assessment work is really a fact-based finding process where we try to establish a baseline, as he showed, of what you own, what the conditions are. Ryan talked about the replacing kind approach to our work, and that's exactly the right way to go about things, to set that baseline, understand what your current condition is, and then build on that to make strategic decisions about how you ought to move forward. And that's really where we can extend our services, where I look forward to working with you around some of those strategic decisions. And Ryan gave a couple of examples of that where, you know, we wouldn't really know if you've got an older boiler, you know, do you love that boiler because it just keeps chugging along and it's got minimal, you know, sort of needs? Or are you really anxious to reduce your carbon footprint and replace that boiler, perhaps even with a ground source heat pump solution or some other more higher efficiency heat generating device? That's a strategic decision. In our baseline facility condition assessment, as we're going through the buildings, we wouldn't know the answer to that question. So we set the baseline. But then as we work with you, another example, you know, if you have Gale Engineering come in and they actually do a up on the roof lifting tiles, looking at fasteners on a tile roof, and determine that the fasteners are failing, and you really should look at a whole roof replacement as opposed to a patch and repair approach. As those decisions come into the picture and we learn more and we gain more information, we can go back into the software and we can create those alternate requirements for those other actions. And then we can continue to expand the understanding and the ability to use the expanded view to answer your strategic decisions. So that's both a software process and also just a working with you, partnering up relationship. And I enjoyed both aspects of that. So we have currently in place, we do have a flexible services hours component to our services. And it may be primarily Pete that I'll wind up working with to make some of those additional adjustments to the software using those hours. That's a bank of hours. It's already there. You've already paid for it. And so we'll work together. We'll use those hours to dive in basically to any subject you'd like to dive into, including if it's just kicking around some ideas about what you might want to do with various buildings and that sort of thing. Then the other component to it is the capital budget prioritization workshop that Brian touched on. And that's what these slides really start to speak to. And this is the software component to that continued relationship around strategy. And this slide that I have here simply speaks to, typical strategic sort of decision-making needs, and how do we reflect those in the software and use that to our advantage as we continue to use the information in the database to make decisions. And so the capital budget workshop process uses the budgets module in the software, leverages all of the data we've put in there. And the idea is that we want to engage all of your primary stakeholders in this process of creating strategic planning decisions. And it quite possibly could be many of the people that are on the call today with us in this presentation might want to participate in that process. And the ultimate objective here is to use the data in a scientific way and make data-driven decisions, but that also reflect your somewhat more subjective thoughts and feelings around, what your objectives are as a town. So how do we do that? So this is an image that's captured from the software, the VFA facility software. This is our budgets module. And this is just one example of a ranking strategy that we might develop as we work together through this workshop, if you decide to go ahead with that. In this particular one, it considers what the use of the building, is the building, is it housing? This is not your site. Is it a educational building? Is it some other type of building? And it ranks those uses against each other. And in this case, this particular customer ranked their support services much less, I'm going to use the word important, although I don't really like that word a whole lot, but less emphasis than their medical facilities. And in software, you actually slide these levers around and you set those priorities. It considered the FCI. And in this case, they wanted to apply their most funding to the systems that were already in good condition to ensure that they would stay in good condition. It considered priority. Their priority ones were their highest. within the priority ranking. It considered the category of, or the driver of the need is category. And it considered what the prime system is. You know, for example, in this case, electrical was weighted very high as opposed to interior finishes. And town of Winchester might feel differently about that. So within each category, you apply those levers, you slide those around, you apply those rankings. And then as a second step, you also rank each of these against each other. So once you set them internally, then you ask yourself, what's more important to us? Is it asset use or is it asset FCI? Is asset FCI more important than the category, the cause, or is it less important? So you set those priorities within each group, then you set them overall, arching as a group. And you can feed into the software what your proposed spending level is. And the result of that, and again, this is not your data, you'll get a ranked list according to that prioritization that you set. Now, the workshop part of that is that we do that prioritization, that ranking with you live in a conference room. And it's a 2-day process. There's a fair commitment there. The first day we talk about what's important to you as an organization. The second day we actually create the strategy and move the levers around and set that. And the end result is that you get all the key stakeholders participating in that process. They're the ones who are determining what's important to you as a town, and you wind up with this ranked list of requirements. So what this is all of those, whatever it was, Ryan showed you 1,300 requirements I think we've created in our database. It'll take those, rank them most important to least important based on the criteria that you set. And in this case, fire protection systems for this client rose to the very top of the list. One other thing I should mention is that we can create custom fields for you and pull those into the strategy. And I noticed that, for example, in your database right now, you have a field, a custom field applied to your systems. Is this a critical system, yes or no? And that's a dimension to the ranking strategy that I'm guessing you would likely want to pull into the ranking strategy as a driver of that overall decision making. We have another city client in the Mid-Atlantic region that as a city who wanted to be responsible to their taxpayer base, they actually put a field in their systems which asks the question, is this system, is it taxpayer facing is what they called it? Is it something that when the taxpayers walk into one of our facilities, they'll be able to see that we've done something? And it wasn't the most critical decision-making point for them, but it was one that they wanted in their strategy. And so we added that in as a ranking strategy and pushed those levers around and included that as an aspect. So just to kind of sum up my portion of this, I think two things I want to emphasize. I'm local, I'm here in town, and I've enjoyed working with the town of Winchester for a long time, and we've got this bank of hours. So we can basically use the existing client care hours that you have any way you want to. And we can talk about that. And then we also have this additional budget prioritization workshop that we would be happy to engage with you on. And I will stop there and leave time for questions either for me around any of the additional services or for Ryan around the basic FCA work that we did. And thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think that was very helpful, both of you. That was an excellent presentation. So I really appreciate the time and effort that you put into putting those together. So I think next step is for us to open the floor to any questions. You can raise your hand. And then if there's lots of people, I'll call on you. If there's only one hand at a time, you can just go ahead. Or if you want to take a beat and kind of think about some of the things we heard today, and we are happy to take any questions and pass them on to Gordian for answers. Obviously, we're going to have a continued relationship with them, if not in this capital process, in the data maintenance process.
And Beth and everybody, I need to drop for another meeting, but I just wanted to say thank you to Gordian for a great presentation. Thank you, Beth, for setting it up. And someone can let me know the Q&A, although it's recorded, so I can watch it later. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Michelle, for your time.
So I think Chris Nixon has his hand up. Just Paul and Ryan, for your benefit, Chris has a long resume of town volunteerism. He's on our school committee, and he serves on our EFPBC, which is our educational facilities building planning committee, as well as our capital planning committee. Go ahead,
Thanks,
Chris.
Beth. Thanks for the presentation, guys. So I just had a couple of clarifying questions. The costs that you're sharing through your presentation, do we assume, it took me a couple of minutes to actually connect, so I apologize if you clarified this earlier. Are these costs that build into the FCI, do we presume these to be construction costs or project costs?
So they are based on the installing contractor costs, and then from that point we try to add an adjustment factor that is it doubles the installing contractor cost to try to approximate the other soft costs that would come in over and above the installing contractor cost. So when you start to roll additional, let's say the electrical contractor in with sheetrock and the folks that are doing the wiring and the lighting, there's going to be an economy of scale there that's hard for us to project. So what we try to do is simulate through our adjustment factor what your ultimate experience cost will be. From that point, it's still going to vary. Of course, if you take our estimates and you put them out to bid, and 3 contractors weigh in with their bids, those costs are going to go all over the board, right? There might be a 30 to 50% spread in their cost too. So it's a hard question to give a concrete answer on, but we're trying to simulate the experience cost as best we can.
So that's helpful. So it sounds to me like, with RS means they do carry trade costs, and then you have the regional adjustment. There's even an adjustment for Boston itself, which is even higher than Massachusetts, but those are just trade costs. So it sounds like although you're relying on means, you still are going even beyond that. You are making some upwards adjustment, which is helpful because that's going to be above just the line item trade cost. So I appreciate that.
That's correct. Yeah.
Then I have the other question I wanted to ask. It was early in your presentation, you had a slide that referenced you're looking at compliance and you're looking at codes. So of course, as we know, existing buildings are grandfathered, so you're only encumbered to the code for which you built the building. And then I go back to your reference about, you may have a building whose HVAC system has no VAV boxes. We have building systems, in place today that if we wished to replace them, we would be replacing them to the current code, not the code under which the building was built. So can you just speak a little bit more to that? I want to be sure I understand what the assumptions are that go into that FCI. So using that VAV example, I think you said you might wish to install a system with VAV, but there could be any number of building systems in which it really was not discretionary for us. It's actually going to be driven by code. So to what degree does the current building code and our obligation to follow it influence your cost assumptions around building systems? Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, it's a great question. So it's difficult for us to know when you're going to do a renovation project that triggers that you now have to comply with all these additional codes, even accessibility, right? So that would require, if you're doing a certain value of the building, to upgrade maybe some of the MEP infrastructure, if the value of that triggers accessibility, now you might be incorporating, based on wanting to do HVAC and electrical upgrades, you may now have to incorporate doors, windows, hallway widths, and handrails and things like that. So it's hard to project where that trigger happens. So we don't attempt to define where that may happen. What we're trying to do is that like-kind replacement. So if you have the heating system, that heating system is broken down to the boiler, the piping, the cast iron radiators at the perimeter. So we would look at, if you wanted to replace the cast iron radiators at the perimeter, here's your value for that in a vacuum. If you wanted to replace the distribution piping as well, here's the value for that in a vacuum. The boiler, etc., in a vacuum. The controls, that's its own broken out item. So how those all get packaged up is really what speaks to your question, which is kind of downstream. And then you'd really be looking at engaging with architectural and engineering firms and perhaps even code consultants to really get in and say, okay, if you're going to do this, it's going to trigger these other costs that are not, we're no longer talking about boilers and lighting. We're talking about your whole building is really, it's time to renovate it. So that would happen downstream of what we're trying to speak to. We're trying to speak to what it takes to maintain the building as it sits now. But we would find, for example, if there's a room that there's an occupant in and it has no ventilation whatsoever, that's a code violation. We're going to pick that up now. That's not necessarily just because, well, the building was built without ventilation in this room that we have people in. Great, let's leave it as is. That doesn't comply. So we would pick up things like that. But yeah, it's you're getting into what would happen downstream of what our information is trying to inform.
Okay, I appreciate that. I guess in my last question, if I can ask one, Beth, and it wasn't clear to me in the screenshots through the presentation. Is there a column? Is there a way in which the VFA database can actually represent what the assessed value is of our buildings? Beth probably knows why I'm asking this question. You know, there are some triggers there in Massachusetts. If you invest more than, I think, 30% of the assessed value of the building over 3 years, there's an obligation to bring it up to code. There's a separate 5-year trigger with respect to accessibility. And that's something we have really had to pay very careful attention to in Winchester over the years, given our capacity to attack one building system, but without the resources to, for instance, bring an entire building up to code. So it would be great if that information could sort of be in the same database. I think some of us just go to the assessor's page from time to time to look for that information. But I was just curious if that's even available to us to be in the tool, that's all.
It's certainly something that could be added through custom fields very simply. Yeah, there are 2 ways to track CRV, the replacement value of the buildings, which is essentially the value of the buildings, or Shropshire Field in this case, right? But the way that we track that CRV is by using the sum total of the systems that we've assessed. So that what we see as the value of all those systems adds up to the value of the building. So that's what we call the system-based approach to defining CRV. There's another way that I wouldn't recommend, but there is another way to define the CRV of a building, which is just based on a spreadsheet value, just a fixed value, but then that has to be maintained. We actually maintained year over year as the value changes, right? But we actually have a system set up to approximate what that building value is relative to the system. So if everything is 50% low or 50% high, your FCI scores are going to be relevant still with the way that it's set up now. But a custom field could be added in to add assessed value of the building or town record value of the building, which may help what you're.
Yeah,
what you're
that's actually
Thank
a
you very
great
much.
example. That's actually a great example of something we could do with the client care hours we have.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
And the software, actually creating a custom field is a very quick, easy thing to do. And that would be like an 1.5-hour task to take a spreadsheet from you and upload those assessed values onto the asset detail pages.
Thank you. Anything else, Chris? Awesome, thanks. Next up, Karen Bolognese, who is the chair of our school committee.
Hi, Karen.
Hello, thanks so much and for the report, and thank you, Beth. I was just wondering, will you be providing a copy of the report to all of the necessary participants? and
I will be
stakeholders?
sending a copy of the POF that was given today to Pete, and then that can be distributed from Pete. So I'll let him. I don't have everybody's contact information that's
Right.
on the meeting today, but yes, there will be a PDF version of that available. And
And
then,
will we get a
as
copy
I
of
had
this
mentioned,
presentation?
I'm sorry.
Will we get a copy of this presentation?
Yes, a PDF copy of the presentation. Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
and I guess at the beginning of the presentation, you had mentioned that you had spoken with different stakeholders and entities in town. And I can't quite tell if you had spoken with the school department and had gotten their input and some of the context and perspectives and historical background on some of the buildings.
Yeah, so that would be with we call the folks that bring our assessors in the field around to the different buildings, walk them through the buildings. So whoever is the escort, that's what we call that person. I think generally that was Pete. Yeah. So
let me just jump in there.
sure.
I think going back to the first question, Karen, there's going to be a hard copy delivered of all the data in the database, but you've only seen one minuscule piece of what there is for data,
Right.
and that every little piece has a drill down and a component. So I'm the keeper of that, and if there's ever anything that wants to be extracted from this, that's what I'm available to do. But when that hard copy comes out, well, certainly anybody can do it. But as far as generating reports, like Chris and I in the past have worked together when it comes time for some of the capital planning, or when putting in the statement of interest and working with the SBA, this has been a useful tool for things like that. So I just wanted to jump in on that. And as far as how the process went for the buildings, so it was a 2-week process with a team of engineers who came out of different disciplines to go through the buildings. I either spent time with them directly on each building, but it was a 2-week process, or I met with them daily, discussed each of the building, temperament of the building, the historical factors, or try to give some understanding of some of the underlying issues that we wanted to focus on. And then we met frequently afterwards, after they've been through. So I was the conduit when the guys were there. They met in the buildings, but there wasn't too much other interaction from any other entities during the process, other than I sent out that they would be going through.
Okay. And I guess the last thing would just be, thank you for that update, Pete. I appreciate that. And then I guess the last thing would just be the school department and the school committee haven't really had a chance to see all of the draft work. So I understand that you're sending the report, but will we also have an opportunity at some point to be able to confirm those FCIs? Because some of it was a little bit different from what we had expected, I would say, just on a first look.
So the FCI, you can, I think Pete may be the person to engage with about how FCIs may vary from what your expectations were. But I just want to stress one point, that FCIs are the result of the sums of the value of the building and its system components, and the cost needs. So it's that ratio between the needs, the FCI cost, sum total of all those FCI costs over the 5-year window, divided by that CRV, the value of the building. So FCI is a result. if we wanted to change the FCI, we would need to zero into what system is in different condition than you were expecting. And keep in mind that though you may experience a building very rough and gruff in some cases, if the structure and the building envelope is in good condition and doesn't have needs that fall within the 5-year cost window, there's a lot of value that's tied up in those systems that may not have needs. So you may experience, being an occupant of the building, that, gosh, this building is in terrible condition. It's always hot. It's always cold. It's always stuffy. Just as an example, that may be strictly attributable in a situation like that. And this is a made up scenario here, but that may be attributable to just the building control system needing to be updated because it's not functioning properly anymore. And that would not make the FCI score all that very low, because it's a low value relative to the building CRV, but it can really determine that the occupants have a tough experience living and working in that building. So it really comes down to zeroing in on the parts of the building individually at the component level that really need to maybe have their remaining years adjusted, and that's how the FCI gets changed over time.
Okay.
So yeah, I think that would be a good conversation to have with Pete, and I'd be happy to engage with Pete about that as well.
Great. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you.
Beth, I have to jump off for a high school gymnasium meeting, but thank you for arranging this.
Speaking of capital projects, thanks.
Thank you,
Chris.
Chris.
Another capital project. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you for the
So,
question. Appreciate the engagement.
Thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
Michelle Bertram, also a school committee member, I think, is next.
Thanks, Beth, and thank you for doing this. I think the last time we sort of took a deep dive into this was when we had our last capital and operating override. So I appreciate you guys diving back into this again. My first question is, I've got two quick questions. My first one is for Pete. Given that this is a VFA update, what has changed between this one and the VFA database that we were using before? Is it just an update to the numbers and walking through the buildings again, or have we expanded scope of the number of things included? Like I heard Cha-Cha Field, but I didn't hear Manchester Field, or, you know, the theaters at the middle and high school, which can be safety issues, or as it's a good segue from Mr. Nixon, the gymnasium is a huge safety issue at the high school right now. So we're working on that, and that fits into how our buildings age. So I'm wondering if our scope has changed, if just the numbers have changed, what's different than it was before?
So the assessment is a complete full assessment. Whatever assessment we had before from it was 2015 through 2017, it was a 2-phase one. That's archived, but it has nothing. I'm using it right now to verify, you know, just take a look at how some things have changed. Back when we did the last assessment too, we were in the process of doing the high school. So the high school wasn't in it. I don't remember who asked for Cha-Cha Field to be put on it, but I do know that at that time it was the fresh turf, the new turf field, and they thought it was good thing to load the information directly from construction of that into the document. I honestly don't remember how that came about. So this is a full assessment, not just a updating of numbers. Like I said, the engineers came through, looked at all the pieces and parts of the building, and did a full assessment. It was pretty involved. Again, it's not a destructive testing. It doesn't give you component replacement options. It's just one for one, and it's a 30,000 foot view, but what we are capturing is coming to end of useful life by most standards like ASHRAE and BOMA, which tell you that, you know, your HVAC equipment and things like that are coming due. And there is, again, there's a system side to this that you're not seeing that gives full system kind of expiration times where there's requirement stuff that we're dealing with for the FCI is what they've observed, taking the standards of age in a physical assessment. So this is all new eyes on assessment of things in the building. Again, when you look at FCI, if you see a low FCI, you might walk into the building and think it looks good, but the age and condition and anticipated end of life of a lot of the major components of, say, HVAC, security, fire alarm, things like that, you don't see them, but they're coming to the end of useful life, and that's observed, and that's in that FCI number. I hope that helps.
It does, but is it just building systems and engineering, Pete? Like, for example, the high school gymnasium, is that included in the database, or is that something that we would have to account for separately?
So it would be in the database. What again, Chris was touching on it, but the way it gets used is, again, the replacement costs are based on standards. It would have been a part for part replacement, not the wood engineered, how a change from what is existing, which we are doing now, but what would be done. So when I do capital and I'm looking for building a project, and say we have roofs, I'll take a portion out of it for the roof. I'll look for ancillary systems like gutters, downspouts, all those projected numbers in there, and put them into basically a project cost. But from there, we use that as a budgetary number to base a project and pull a request for engineering dollars to present to capital. So capital understands kind of a baseline budget cost, and if it's going to bite, the initial engineering will be requested, and in that, whether it's a part for part replacement or it takes off on its own life as far as changing of function for needs for the schools, that's where, when the project's developed, working with the school department or whatever other stakeholders, sustainability, everybody gets to be involved then in the design and production of the actual request through that engineering. And then a real number is presented back to capital for the project. So this, again, is a tool. It's not a push button, here's your cost, develop it, put it out to bid.
So it's not necessarily a one-for-one ranking system either, because then I guess my next question is for Mr. Peters. And I'm wondering, in that number you gave, you said like the first 2 years, sorry, I'm mobile at the moment too, so I wasn't writing it down, but like $20 million each year for the first 2 years. That's just a recommendation based on the FCI. You said you work with a lot of towns in the area and things like that. And I guess I'm wondering, when you're making recommendations like that about costs, is there any town sort of the size, age, resources of Winchester that realistically meet any of these goals year over year that you're talking about? Like, I guess I'm trying to figure out the gap between realistic and idealistic in terms of those recommendations.
Yeah, so we do have some services that compare the data that we are able to develop here at Gordian for our customers versus comparable customer types out there in the world. So that would be versus another town. That's a different service engagement, which we would be happy to discuss that if that's something that the town would like to engage in. But that's not something that is that I have visibility of at this point from this perspective, having done the FCA.
So that would be our benchmarking service that Ryan's referring to. And in that case, what we do is we anonymize the data for other similar clients. We let you select based on those anonymized parameters, because we would never reveal your data to some other entity, for example. You can select who we benchmark against, and you can see how you look compared to other similar cities and towns. Does that answer your question?
I think it's a start at answering it. Thank you.
Yeah,
Okay.
So
it's
that's
possible to get there with Gordian, but it's not something that we have presently. But that is a service that we offer, like Paul said, the benchmarking.
The only
your
other thing I would
sorry.
add on to that, specific to the high school, you know, as Ryan explained in his presentation, our approach is a system by system approach. It's not a space by space approach, but we
Right.
would have looked at the theaters, we would have looked at the gymnasiums. All of the systems that make up those gymnasiums and theaters are part of our data. And it's a continuing relationship. You know, if there's, I'm not personally familiar with exactly what the problem is at the high school gym, but if there's an aspect of that problem that we need to further address as a requirement, we're here, and it's a live database. That's what it's for. We'll go into it, we'll make an adjustment if we need to. Pete can make an adjustment, but that's the whole idea. Over time, the database is intended to be live, it's intended to be active. You go and you tweak it, you make sure it covers exactly what you want it to cover.
Great, thank
so
you.
with thank
Sorry,
you.
go ahead, Michelle.
Oh, that's okay, Beth. I was just going to say, so with the percentages you were recommending, and then we talked about other priorities like health and safety, it sounds like each town needs to develop sort of that priority list before we can go back and do the rankings. Is that how the process works?
I think
Well,
that might actually be part of the prioritization workshop, Paul. Would that's something that we could consider at that level, would it not?
yeah, we could absolutely talk about that as part of that process. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks. That's all really helpful.
I think this data is one piece of our overall planning, right? It's kind of a high level look, and then we need to use this data to drill down into the specific projects and timelines. And next up, Tom Hopcroft, our school committee vice chair. Thanks.
Promote me like no, thank you very much. This is a really helpful presentation for me, and I particularly like the fact that this is a dynamic live database. You know, and when you talk about the printout, I'm like, I don't know what I would do with that printout. You know, I appreciate the ability to work with you know, Pete and drill down as we have specific queries in different areas. I also am really you know, see this as really essential for proactive planning, and look forward to potentially participating in the strategy prioritization workshops, because I think that's really, you know, it's, you know, the data is one thing, but how you use the data, you know, what are the actionable insights we can get out of it. One of the areas I wanted to ask, following up on Ms. Bergstrom, and I think, Paul, you actually got to this about spaces not being you know, native fields within the database. But I imagine if we wanted to tag things related to the gym and the gym floor and the other things related to the gym or the theater or otherwise, those are just custom fields that we could put in, so we could pull everything that relates to data around a certain space if that was important to us.
Absolutely.
As you know.
And another way that we can approach that, for example, high bay structural steel trusses might, I don't know, might be a system in our data at the high school. That system might cover both the gymnasium and a theater space or something like that. We can split that system, and we can turn it into two systems, and we can call one high bay at the gymnasium and the other one high bay at the theater. And then that way they are directly tied to those spaces.
Can I just follow up on that?
Sure.
So again, like the work that's going to be done at WHS, the work that's going to be done at the in the floor and the gym and the space change and all that, our intention is to keep this live data updated, again, with either the customer care hours we have now or the money that I have requested and have in my upcoming budget to where we didn't do anything more other than me make some adjustments, you know, move time frames, age as things were fixed or replaced. What we're going to do is send the engineering using the actual costs to create another line item, not either adjust the system or create a new requirement but actually the requirement then will have real cost to it. It will be put as a renewal for whatever the assumed life of that would be. It wouldn't be seen in the FCI until it crept up to that 30-year life or whatever it is, using the cost that we actually pay, which will escalate based on the inflation numbers over those years. So it will be worked into the database using real numbers and the changes to the space where, you know, new bleachers are getting moved different areas. It's going to be a maple floor, not a rubber floor. All that will be, you know, put into this system somewhere as it's completed.
That's great. You know, so updates in real time as we go forward. A lot of this is backward looking. I'm wondering, is there an opportunity to put forward looking, you know, as we think about, you know, as we transition, say, you know, heat systems to, you know, more clean energy sources, or you talked about structural steel in the ceilings that are, I mean, we obviously can't probably go back and put that in, but if there are things that we're anticipating that in the future we might want to do, is there a way to model out, you know, what sort of bringing things up to like a net zero standard or otherwise would be as a future scenario planning, or is it really just a you know, sort of management cost projection kind of thing?
Yeah, there's a couple of different ways we could handle that. We can create alternate, we call them alternate actions for a particular requirement. And then we can run forward-looking reports that focus on those alternate actions. You know, in an extreme case, we could actually duplicate your entire database and give it another name. We could call it Winchester of the future or something like that. And we could go in there and tweak all the data to that to describe a particular scenario that you'd like to see. Probably a sweeping thing like that might not be what you want to do, but certainly the alternate action approach we could take.
Yeah, that'd be interesting, especially with the sort of 2050, you know, town and state climate goals, you know, to be able to say, well, what would it look like if we brought everything up to this level? Last question was just around, you know, it's such a powerful tool. I'm really excited by it. And I'm wondering about lots of other sort of inclusivity of lots of other, you know, capital assets, you know, other fields, playgrounds, you know, solar systems we may have, as well as like bridges and culverts and other things that we're planning for. You know, and maybe that's more of a Pete and Beth question, but you know, are these things that we're thinking of also tracking in this? We have a comprehensive view, or I'm just curious what our thinking is on that.
Well, I can just jump in saying that I do have plans now that we have more data coming in on playgrounds to create, you know, those in this database as well. They're not in there now, as we're looking at the replacement of Lincoln, the replacement of Vincent and surfaces. Again, all that data is going to be put in, and with the new Leonard Field and pending Leonard playground and geez, now I'm having a brain fog. McDonald.
Yeah.
Those will, you know, with actual real new engineering construction, that's the time to put it in once we actually have the project done, and then all of that will go in and create those. But the other stuff, after I have another review and safety inspection this summer of the remaining ones that we're peeling off, they'll have the people I'm working with are going to provide me with the right data to create those in them. If it's a school, we're just going to add it into the school requirements and or systems area. But if it's a field like Leonard or McDonald, we hope to have it as its own standalone, like Cha-Cha Field.
Yeah, and I think it probably makes sense to start tracking the turf at Manchester Field in the same way that we track Cha-Cha Field turf.
Yeah.
I think the bridges are probably a little bit harder to incorporate. I don't think you guys have a structural.
No, we can do that.
Division,
You know, it's just a
yeah.
matter of what you'd like to put in. We've
Yeah.
even had a town that asked us, they wanted to put their fire engines in as assets in the database. So yeah, we can certainly do that type of thing. In the alternate field, you know, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it exactly right. Now that we've got the Shasha field, we can just copy that and tweak it a little bit to create the other field as a data modeling exercise. I'm sure that would be reasonably accurate.
Yeah, I live over on Winter Pond, and I know some of the folks on Little Winter, you know, are having a lot of flooding issues. And there's an old culvert, you know, that drains the
Mhm.
water, you know, that they're talking about. I'm like, well, geez, wouldn't it be great if the lifetime, and I don't know if we're at the end of a lifetime or whatever, but I think of all those, you know, the new culverts we put in, we probably know what the lifetime of those things is. And so just for the future, not to be surprised that this turf field is, you know, at end of life, this, and again, I'm on the school side, not the bridge side, but I was like, well, bridges, fire trucks, all those things are expensive and come up from time to time. So anyway, thank you so much. I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Tom.
Any other questions from folks? Okay. Well, thank you everybody for your time, and especially Ryan and Paul, thank you for your. Pete, did you have something?
No, I was just gonna say, excellent job. I think Ryan has done a great job on the presentation. Again, I'm open for any questions. I haven't shared a lot of data right now with building occupants such as principals and things like, because it's been in draft form. And we didn't want a lot of this stuff out there until you stakeholders were aware of what it was and how we were gonna use it. But the next step for me is taking the requirements list and working with you know, bringing it to the principals to and working with it more to massage it within the building to make sure that any adjustments are made.
Great. And Pete, how many 3-ring binders do you get of the printout?
I can't even. It's huge. That's all. It's huge. Because there's so much stuff that you can pull up. You drill down to each one of the requirements, pull it up, and it's got the assessment, a little narrative, and then there's also a full narrative of each of the buildings, and just a tremendous tool. But you know, extracting what you need is what's great about it.
It's
Save
much
paper.
easier to find something in the live data than it is in a library, you know, of 3-ring binders that are dusty up on a shelf. Yeah, for sure. For
To save
sure.
a few trees, use the online version.
Absolutely. Yep.
Pete, that conversation would also include like Dr. Hackett and Maren.
Well, I've worked with Andrew already. Andrew has
Okay.
seen it because we're in the process of capital planning.
Yep.
So I did with him to that point saying this is draft, please don't share it, but we worked on it for our capital planning 5-year plan that we've got a form to it and we're still working on it. So yes, it's been shared at that level, and I believe Chris Nixon has also seen it as they sat down about capital, and we're going to meet again on it next week.
Okay, yeah, just wanted to make sure of that.
Great.
All right. Thank you,
Well,
everybody. Appreciate
thank
it.
you everyone for
Thank you.
attending. Appreciate the
All right.
fantastic engagement and the time dedicated to this morning. Thanks for organizing, putting this
course.
together,
Yeah.
and carving some time out of your day to hear this. Greatly appreciate it, and we look forward to continuing this relationship as we go forward.
Thanks,
Excellent.
everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you
Take
all.
care. Bye.
Have a good
Appreciate it.
weekend.
Bye-bye.